The first time Ambassador ZYX then met humans, he thought he understood them completely. Their delegation arrived at the Galactic Council station aboard a modest ship called the Endeavor, nothing like the massive war vessels that other species brought to show their strength. The humans wore simple blue uniforms without the elaborate decorations that marked warriors among the Kethri, or the biomodifications that the Nexari used to display their technological superiority. Captain Sarah Chan stepped forward as their representative, a small creature barely reaching ZYX's mid-torso. Her brown eyes held a warmth that reminded him of the peaceful lake dwellers from his homeworld's southern continent. When she spoke, her voice carried no threatening undertones, no aggressive posturing that marked the dominant species in the galaxy. "We come in peace," she said, using the standard galactic greeting. "Earth seeks friendship and trade partnerships with all willing civilizations." ZYX's four arms gestured in the traditional welcome of his people, his scale hide shifting to show pleasure colors. Humans seemed so refreshingly peaceful after dealing with the militant Grax Empire and the predatory Void Hunters. Here was a species that understood diplomacy, that valued cooperation over conquest. During the first week of negotiations, ZYX's positive impression only strengthened. The humans brought gifts, not weapons or territorial claims, but art, music, and food from their world. They shared stories of their planet Earth, describing vast oceans and forests, cities where different nations worked together despite their differences. They spoke of something called the United Nations, where conflicts were resolved through discussion rather than warfare. Dr. James Rodriguez, their chief scientist, eagerly shared human discoveries in medicine and agriculture. His eyes lit up as he described how humans had eliminated several diseases and developed farming techniques that could feed billions without destroying their environment. There was no boasting, no demands for exclusive technology trades that other species typically made. The humans genuinely seemed to want to help others. "Your people sound remarkably peaceful," ZYX then observed during a private dinner with a human delegation. They were sharing a meal in the station's diplomatic quarters, the artificial gravity set to Earth normal to accommodate their guests. Captain Chun smiled, that gentle expression that ZYX then had come to associate with human contentment. "We've learned that cooperation achieves more than conflict. Our history taught us that lesson the hard way." "Your history?" ZYX then inquired, his curiosity genuine. Most species loved to recount their greatest military victories, their conquests, and territorial expansions. The humans had spoken little of their past beyond their recent peaceful achievements. "We had wars," Dr. Rodriguez said quietly, his hands pausing over his food. "Many wars. But we realized that fighting only brought suffering. We chose a different path." ZYX then nodded approvingly. Here was wisdom that many species never achieved. The Galactic Council had seen too many civilizations destroy themselves through endless conflicts. The humans represented something rare, a species that had evolved beyond their violent instincts. Over the following days, ZYX then observed the humans closely. They were unfailingly polite to every species they encountered, even the notoriously difficult crystalline collective representatives who communicated only through harmonic frequencies that most translators struggled with. When the Aquatic Federation delegates required specialized environmental suits, the humans immediately offered to help modify the meeting chambers to accommodate them. The human trade proposals were equally impressive. They offered medical knowledge freely, asking only for cultural exchanges and basic resources that were abundant throughout the galaxy. Their requests were so modest that ZYX then had to double-check the translation protocols. Most species demanded exclusive mining rights or territorial concessions for far less valuable offerings. Ambassador, Captain Chin approached him after one particularly successful negotiation session. "We were wondering if you might share some information about the Outer Rim territories. We're interested in establishing peaceful contact with civilizations that haven't yet joined the Council." ZYX then's protective instincts immediately activated. The Outer Rim was dangerous territory, home to the most aggressive and unpredictable species in known space. The Council maintained a careful distance from those regions, sending only heavily armed exploration fleets when absolutely necessary. "Captain, I must advise against such ventures. The Outer Rim contains species that view newcomers as either threats to be eliminated or resources to be exploited. The Council has lost several diplomatic missions in those sectors. Dr. Rodriguez leaned forward with interest. What kind of species are we talking about? ZYX then's hide shifted to warning colors involuntarily. Primarily the Ravager clans, nomadic raiders who attack any ship they encounter. They've been expanding their territory steadily, destroying entire colonies. The Council has been reluctant to engage them directly. The humans exchanged glances that ZYX then couldn't quite interpret. There was something in their expressions that seemed different from their usual peaceful demeanor, but it passed so quickly he might have imagined it. "We appreciate the warning," Captain Chun said finally. "Perhaps it's something to consider for the future, when we're better established in Council space." The conversation moved on to other topics, and ZYX then thought no more of it. The humans were clearly too wise to risk their people in such dangerous regions. Their peaceful nature would never allow for the kind of military response that the Ravagers would require. 3 months later, the human delegation prepared to return to Earth with their trade agreements and new diplomatic relationships. ZYX then had grown genuinely fond of these gentle creatures, so different from the aggressive posturing of most species. They had brought a refreshing perspective to Council debates, often suggesting compromise solutions that other delegates hadn't considered. "We'll be back within a year," Captain Chim promised, as they prepared to board their modest ship. Earth is excited to begin these new relationships. ZYX then performed the farewell gesture of his people, his 4 arms weaving the traditional pattern of friendship and safe travel. "You honor us with your peaceful wisdom. May your journey home be swift and safe." As the Endeavor departed, its simple engines leaving no impressive display of power, ZYX then felt optimistic about the future. The galaxy needed more species like humanity, beings who chose cooperation over conflict, understanding over dominance. The humans had shown that evolution could lead to something better than the endless cycle of war and conquest that plagued most civilizations. 6 months passed before ZYX then heard from humanity again. When a message came, it was not from Captain Chun or Earth's diplomatic corps. It arrived through Council intelligence networks, marked with the highest priority encryption codes reserved for galaxy-threatening emergencies. The report was brief but shocking. An entire Ravager clan, 300 ships strong, had vanished from the Outer Rim. Their last known position was near a small planet called Haven, one of the few peaceful colonies that had somehow survived in Ravager territory. Search and rescue missions found only debris fields where the Ravager fleet should have been, and the colonists of Haven reported that their attackers had simply disappeared. ZYX then studied the report with growing confusion. Ravager clans didn't simply vanish. They were the apex predators of space, their fleets capable of overwhelming even Council military forces. The mysterious disappearance made no sense, and the lack of survivors or witnesses made investigation impossible. It would be weeks before he learned the truth, and when he did, everything he thought he knew about humanity would shatter like crystal in a storm. The second Ravager fleet disappeared 3 weeks later. This one was even larger, 500 ships commanded by Warlord Krextar, whose name struck fear across dozen star systems. The Krextar clan had been responsible for the destruction of 3 Council colonies and countless independent settlements. They were not the type of enemy that simply vanished without explanation. ZYX then received the intelligence report while reviewing trade negotiations with the methane breathers of Titan 7. The data pad slipped from his primary hands as he read the details. Like the first incident, there was no trace of the Ravager fleet except scattered debris. No distress signals, no evidence of battle damage to suggest they'd fought another fleet. They had simply ceased to exist. Council Security Director Vothran called an emergency session within hours of the report circulation. The amphitheater filled with representatives from every major species, their usual diplomatic chatter replaced by nervous whispers and agitated displays of their various anxiety responses. The Crystalline Collective's delegates hummed in discordant frequencies, while the Aquatic Federation representatives released stress chemicals that clouded their environmental suits. 2 fleets, Director Vothran announced, his voice carrying the weight of his species' military authority. The Voth were among the galaxy's most experienced warriors, having fought in every major conflict for the past 1,000 years. Combined strength of 800 vessels, all destroyed without a single distress transmission or survivor. Ambassador Keth of the Hive Collective raised her bioluminescent communication organs. Our border scouts report unusual energy signatures in both affected regions. Unknown weapon technologies, unlike anything in our databases. Energy signatures? ZYX then found himself asking, what type of technology could eliminate entire fleets so efficiently? The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Every species in the Council possessed advanced weapons, but nothing capable of such complete destruction without leaving evidence of the conflict. The Ravagers themselves used planet-cracking artillery and void rippers that could tear holes in space itself. Yet their fleets have been eliminated without apparently firing a single shot. We're implementing immediate defensive protocols, Director Vothran continued. All Council territories are now under yellow alert. Military patrols are being increased, and exploration missions to the Outer Rim are suspended indefinitely. The session continued for hours, with each species sharing their intelligence and theories. The Techno Syndicate suggested a new type of quantum weapon, while the Psionic Brotherhood proposed mental attacks that could disable entire crews simultaneously. None of the theories fully explained the complete disappearance of the fleets and their debris patterns. As the session concluded, ZYX then noticed something that sent cold recognition through his nervous system. During the entire emergency meeting, the human representative had remained silent. Their current ambassador, a quiet woman named Dr. Lisa Park, had taken notes diligently, but offered no theories, no intelligence reports, no expressions of concern that were typical when species felt threatened. Her silence itself was unusual. Humans typically participated actively in council discussions, offering insights and questions that often led to breakthrough solutions. Their absence from this debate felt wrong, like a missing harmony in a complex musical composition. That evening, ZYX then requested a private meeting with Dr. Park. They met in the same diplomatic quarters where he'd first dined with Captain Chun, the familiar environment somehow feeling less comfortable than before. Dr. Park arrived precisely on time, carrying herself with the same gentle demeanor that characterized all human interactions he'd witnessed. Ambassador ZYX, thank you for inviting me. I understand you have concerns about recent events in the Outer Rim. Dr. Park, I've been wondering about humanity's response to these incidents. Your people haven't offered any theories or assistance in investigating these fleet disappearances. This seems unlike your usual cooperative approach. Dr. Park sat carefully, her movements precise and controlled in a way that ZYX then was beginning to recognize as distinctly human. We're still analyzing the available data. Earth prefers not to speculate without sufficient evidence. Of course, ZYX then agreed, though something in her tone triggered his predator detection instincts, evolutionary remnants from his species' pre-civilization period that rarely activated in diplomatic settings. I was curious if your people might have encountered anything unusual during your Outer Rim explorations. The pause that followed lasted exactly 2.3 seconds, long enough for ZYX to notice, brief enough to seem natural to most observers. Dr. Park's expression remained pleasantly neutral, but something shifted in her eyes that reminded him of deep water hiding unknown currents. As I mentioned during our initial negotiations, humanity decided to focus on council territory rather than venturing into dangerous regions. Captain Chen's mission was quite clear about that. ZYX nodded, but his enhanced memory, a trait his species had developed for tracking multiple predators simultaneously, recalled the conversation differently. The humans had asked specifically about Outer Rim territories and had seemed more interested than fearful when he described the dangers. The discrepancy was subtle, but real. Certainly, that was the wise decision. Though I must admit, the efficiency of these attacks reminds me of something Captain Chen mentioned about human military history. Something about learning from past conflicts. Dr. Park's smile never wavered, but ZYX then caught a micro-expression that his predator instincts labeled as dangerous. It lasted less than a quarter second, but it transformed her face from gentle diplomat to something else entirely, something that evaluated him with the cold calculation of a natural killer. Humanity has indeed learned from our past, she said carefully. We understand the costs of conflict and prefer peaceful solutions whenever possible. The phrase whenever possible echoed in ZYX-Then's mind long after Dr. Park departed. Most species would have said always or without exception when describing their commitment to peace. The subtle qualification suggested that humans maintained options that other peaceful species had abandoned entirely. That night, ZYX-Then accessed the Council's deepest archives, using his ambassadorial clearance to research humanity's background files. The initial contact reports painted the same picture he'd observed personally. A peaceful species emerging from a history of conflict, committed to cooperation and mutual understanding. But as he dug deeper into the restricted files, details emerged that hadn't been included in the standard briefings. Human history contained conflicts unlike anything recorded by other species. Their wars had evolved from simple territorial disputes to global catastrophes involving weapons that could sterilize entire continents. The humans had developed nuclear fusion not for energy production, but for destruction capabilities that could crack planetary crusts. The most disturbing discovery came in a psychological evaluation report filed by the Council's Xenobiology Department. Unlike most species that had evolved past their aggressive phases, humans retained all their predatory instincts alongside their cooperative developments. They hadn't abandoned their capacity for violence. They had simply learned to control it with terrifying precision. Dr. YXTI of the Science Collective had noted, humans demonstrate unprecedented ability to compartmentalize aggressive responses while maintaining genuine peaceful intentions. This dual nature appears to be neurologically hardwired rather than culturally imposed, suggesting that human peace represents conscious choice rather than evolutionary limitation. The report included psychological profiles that made ZYX-Then's protective coloring shift to alarm patterns despite his conscious efforts to remain calm. Humans possessed empathy levels that exceeded most species, allowing them to form deep emotional connections with almost any sentient being. But they also retained predatory focus capabilities that could override emotional responses entirely when they perceived threats to their group. Threat assessment protocols in humans appear to operate independently of their social cooperation systems, DR. YXTI had written, this allows them to maintain genuine friendship with species while simultaneously calculating optimal destruction methods should those species become hostile. The psychological mechanisms are unlike anything previously documented in spacefaring civilizations. ZYX then closed the files with trembling hands, his forearms struggling to coordinate properly. The peaceful, cooperative humans he'd grown to respect and admire were real, but they coexisted with something else, something that other species had never developed or had lost during their evolution to civilization. The next morning brought another intelligence report. A third Ravager fleet had vanished, this time near the Broken World sector where they'd been threatening a refugee settlement. The pattern was becoming clear to anyone willing to see it. The disappeared fleets had all been attacking or threatening peaceful colonies, particularly those that couldn't defend themselves. Someone was hunting the hunters, and that someone possessed technology and tactical capabilities that exceeded anything in the known galaxy. As ZYX then reviewed the latest debris patterns and energy signatures, a terrible understanding began to crystallize in his mind. He thought about Captain Chen's gentle smile when she'd asked about Outer Rim territories. He remembered Dr. Rodriguez's quiet comment about learning from their history the hard way. He considered Dr. Park's careful phrasing about peaceful solutions being preferred whenever possible. The humans hadn't simply learned to control their aggressive instincts. They had weaponized their capacity for both peace and war, creating something entirely new, a species that could genuinely love their friends while ruthlessly destroying their enemies, often without their friends ever knowing the violence existed. ZYX then realized he was about to learn what happened when someone threatened the peaceful future that humanity had chosen to build. The proof came 2 days later, delivered in a way that shattered every assumption ZYX then had made about human nature. He was reviewing morning intelligence reports when his personal communicator chimed with an incoming transmission marked with Earth's diplomatic seal. The message was from Captain Shun herself, speaking from the bridge of a ship that definitely wasn't the modest endeavor he remembered. Ambassador ZYX, this is Captain Shun of the U.S. Retribution. I'm transmitting coordinates for a meeting that I believe you'll find educational. Please come alone and unarmed. You have my word that no harm will come to you." The coordinates led to an asteroid field in neutral space, 3 hours' journey from the council station. HFY then debated reporting the meeting to Security Director Vothran, but something in Captain Chin's tone suggested that this was information the council wasn't ready to possess. Against every diplomatic protocol he'd ever learned, he departed in a single-person courier ship without filing a flight plan. The asteroid field appeared empty when he arrived, his sensors detecting only the usual mineral signatures and cosmic radiation. Then space itself seemed to bend, and ships began to appear where nothing had existed moments before. Not one or two vessels, but dozens sleek, predatory shapes that moved with the coordinated precision of a hunting pack. At the center of the formation, a massive dreadnought materialized like a nightmare, becoming real. The Retribution was 3 times larger than the biggest Council warship, its hull covered in weapon systems that ZYX then couldn't begin to identify. Angular armor plating gave it the appearance of a metallic predator, all sharp edges and hidden teeth. This wasn't a ship built for exploration or even traditional warfare. It was designed for something far more absolute. "Welcome aboard, Ambassador." Captain Chin's voice came through his communicator with the same gentle warmth he remembered, creating a cognitive disconnect that made his nervous system struggle to process the reality before him. ZYX's courier ship was guided into a hangar bay that could have held a small fleet. The internal architecture was unlike anything he'd seen, not the utilitarian design of military vessels or the aesthetic considerations of diplomatic ships, but something that spoke of violence as art form. The corridors were wide enough for rapid troop movement. The lighting was positioned to eliminate blind spots, and every surface seemed to be reinforced against battle damage. Captain Chin met him at the airlock, wearing the same blue uniform he remembered, but somehow transformed by the context. Her gentle smile remained genuine, but now he could see the calculated assessment in her eyes, the predator evaluating its environment with every glance. "Thank you for coming, ZYX Dan. I want to show you something that will help you understand what humanity really is." She led him through corridors filled with human crew members who moved with the fluid coordination of apex predators. These weren't the peaceful diplomats and scientists he'd met at Council Station. These humans carried themselves like professional killers, their every movement economical and precise. Yet when they encountered Captain Chun, their expressions softened with genuine affection and respect. The bridge was a masterpiece of controlled lethality. Tactical displays showed the positions of every vessel within 3-star systems. Threat assessments calculated attack vectors and defensive positions in real time, and weapon system indicators revealed firepower that could sterilize planets. At the center of this technological nightmare, Captain Chin took her command chair with the same calm grace she'd shown during their peaceful dinner meetings. "Display tactical recordings from Ravager engagements," she ordered. The main screen shifted to show the final moments of Warlord Krekstar's fleet. ZYX then watched in horrified fascination as 500 Ravager vessels, each one a nightmare of spikes and weapon platforms designed for terrorizing civilian populations, suddenly found themselves surrounded by ships that had materialized from apparently empty space. The battle lasted exactly 47 seconds. Human vessels moved like a coordinated organism, each ship anticipating the other's actions with mathematical precision. They didn't simply outfight the Ravagers. They systematically dismantled them with surgical efficiency that was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. Weapon systems ZYX then couldn't identify tore through Ravager armor like tissue paper, while defensive screens deflected return fire with casual ease. But the most disturbing aspect wasn't the technological superiority. It was the complete absence of mercy or hesitation. The humans fought like natural disasters given consciousness, implacable, efficient, and absolutely certain of their righteousness. The Ravagers had just finished destroying a colony ship carrying 30,000 refugees from the Centauri conflict. Captain Chun explained with the same gentle tone she might use to describe Earth's weather. Men, women, children, and elderly who had already lost their homes once and were seeking safety in Council space. The Ravagers killed them for sport and spare parts. ZYX then watched as the last Ravager vessel, Krekstar's personal flagship, tried to flee. Human ships appeared in its path with the inevitability of a closing trap. The flagship's destruction was methodical, each weapon system disabled before the final killing blow, ensuring that Krekstar had time to understand that his reign of terror was ending. "How long have you been doing this?" ZYXN managed to ask. "Since 3 weeks, after we left Council Station the first time," Captain Chen replied. Dr. Rodriguez's team had already identified 17 active Ravager fleets and mapped their operational territories. "We've eliminated 11 fleets so far, with 6 remaining on our target list." The casual mention of target lists sent ice through ZYXN's circulatory system. This wasn't random violence or impulsive retaliation. This was systematic extermination carried out with industrial efficiency. "But your people at Council Station, they were genuinely peaceful, weren't they?" Captain Chen's smile held infinite gentleness and absolutely no apology. "Of course they were peaceful. Dr. Rodriguez really does care deeply about sharing medical knowledge to help other species. Our trade negotiators genuinely want to build lasting friendships. Our diplomats truly believe in cooperation and mutual understanding. Nothing about our peaceful intentions was false." "Then, how can you reconcile this?" ZYX then gestured at the displays showing the obliteration of entire fleets. "Because peace requires protection," she answered simply. "The galaxy is full of species like yours, intelligent, cooperative beings who've evolved beyond their aggressive instincts. You've built something beautiful, but you can't defend it against creatures like the Ravagers. You try to negotiate with beings who view your desire for peace as weakness to be exploited." The main display shifted to show intelligence footage of Ravager attacks on civilian targets. ZYX then watched council colonies burn while their peaceful inhabitants died screaming, their diplomatic protocols useless against enemies who saw mercy as stupidity. "Humanity retains something that most advanced species have lost," Captain Chen continued. "We kept our capacity for righteous fury. When we see innocents being slaughtered by predators who can't be reasoned with or reformed, we don't write diplomatic protests or call for sanctions. We hunt them down, and we kill them all." "The Council has military forces," ZYX then protested weakly. "The Council has soldiers trained for territorial disputes and defensive operations," Captain Chen corrected. "You don't have killers trained for extinction events. Your people can't do what we're doing because you've evolved past the psychological structures necessary for absolute warfare. You're not cruel enough to be truly kind." The phrase hit ZYX then like a physical blow. In trying to become better than their violent ancestors, his people and most council species had lost the ability to protect themselves from those who had never evolved beyond predation. They had assumed that intelligence automatically led to cooperation, that advancement meant abandoning violence entirely. Humans had followed a different path. They had kept their claws while learning to shake hands, maintained their killing instincts while developing genuine empathy. It created a species that could form deep friendships with former enemies while systematically exterminating threats to the peaceful order they wanted to build. "Show him the Sanctuary Project," one of the bridge officers suggested. Captain Chen nodded, and the display changed again. This time it showed the refugee settlement that had been under Ravager threat when the Third Fleet disappeared. But instead of destruction, ZYX then saw something impossible: a thriving colony protected by orbital defense platforms of clearly human design, with human medical ships providing aid to injured refugees. "We don't just kill the monsters," Captain Chen explained. "We protect those who can't protect themselves. Every species that the Ravagers terrorized, every colony they threatened, every refugee ship they hunted, they're all under human protection now. We've established defensive networks around 47 vulnerable settlements, and we're training local security forces to maintain them. The Council doesn't know any of this exists. The Council doesn't need to know. Your people sleep better at night thinking the universe is becoming more peaceful through diplomatic progress. And they're right. It is becoming more peaceful. The Ravagers are dying, the refugees are safe, and trade routes are opening through formerly dangerous space. The mechanism of peace just isn't what you thought it was." ZYX then stared at the displays, showing human ships protecting alien colonies, human medical teams treating species they'd never encountered before, human engineers building defensive systems, and asking for nothing in return except the knowledge that innocence would be safe. "You're gardeners," he whispered, the realization hitting him like a revelation. Captain Chun tilted her head curiously. "Gardeners? You tend the garden of galactic civilization. You water the flowers, protect, and nurture the peaceful species. And you pull the weeds, eliminate those who threaten the garden's growth. You've made yourselves the caretakers of a peace that other species benefit from, but could never maintain themselves." "That's actually a beautiful way to describe it," Captain Chin said, her smile brightening with genuine pleasure. "Though we prefer to think of ourselves as guardian angels, the kind with flaming swords." The meeting continued for 2 more hours, during which ZYX then learned about humanity's shadow fleet. Hundreds of ships conducting operations throughout the galaxy, eliminating threats that the Council didn't even know existed, and protecting vulnerable species that had never heard of humanity. It was a vast, complex operation that required the cooperation of thousands of humans who genuinely believed in peace, but were willing to become monsters to protect it. When it was time to leave, Captain Chin walked him back to his courier ship personally. At the airlock, she took his hands in hers with the same gentle warmth he remembered from their first meeting. "I hope this doesn't change your opinion of our people too dramatically," she said. "The humans you've met at Council Station, they really are who we are. We believe in friendship, cooperation, and peaceful solutions to problems. It's just that sometimes peace requires violence, and we're willing to be the ones who provide it. Will you tell me if there are other threats?" ZYX then asked. "Other dangers that the Council should know about?" Captain Chin's expression grew thoughtful. "There's something moving in the deep void beyond our current detection range. Something that makes the Ravagers look like petulant children. When we've learned more, we'll decide how much the Council needs to know." As ZYX then ship departed, he watched the human fleet fade back into invisibility, their cloaking technology rendering them undetectable once again. He was left alone with the knowledge that humanity was far more than they appeared to be, not despite their peaceful nature, but because of it. The gentle diplomats he'd befriended were real. The caring scientists were genuine. The cooperative traders were authentic. But beneath that peace lay something that other species had lost or never possessed: the willingness to become necessary monsters in service of unnecessary suffering's elimination. Humanity had learned the most difficult lesson in the galaxy. Sometimes, the greatest act of love is knowing when to stop being merciful. 6 months passed before ZYX then learned what Captain Chun had meant about something in the deep void. The discovery came not through intelligence reports or diplomatic channels, but through a phenomenon that terrified every species in the galaxy. Entire star systems began going silent. It started with Kepler 442, a remote system on the edge of explored space where a mining consortium had been extracting rare metals for the past 50 years. The system's regular communication beacon simply stopped transmitting one day, its scheduled check-in replaced by empty static. Similar failures had happened before: equipment malfunctions, solar storms, or administrative delays, so the initial response was routine maintenance protocols. But when a Council investigation ship arrived at Kepler 442, they found something that defied every law of physics and biology they understood. The stars still burned, the planets remained in their orbits, but every trace of life had been systematically removed. Not destroyed, removed. Buildings stood empty, but undamaged. Machinery continued operating without operators, and organic matter had simply ceased to exist without leaving even molecular traces behind. The investigation team's report read like a fever dream written by someone losing their sanity. Every biological component in the system had vanished simultaneously: bacteria in the soil, algae in the oceans, trees in the forests, and every sentient being who had called the system home. Even their remains were gone, leaving only sterile environments that should have been teeming with life. "It's like someone used an enormous filter to strain every living thing out of reality," reported Dr. Kexmala, the expedition's chief scientist. "The selectivity is absolute. Biological matter is gone, but synthetic materials and inorganic compounds remain completely unaffected." The report sent shockwaves through the Council. Species that had never agreed on anything suddenly found common ground in their terror of whatever could accomplish such comprehensive biological removal. Emergency sessions were called, military fleets were mobilized, and every civilization began developing evacuation protocols for their core worlds. Then, Kepler 438 went silent. Then, HD 40307. Then, Wolf 1061. Each investigation revealed the same impossible scene. Functioning infrastructure in pristine condition, but every living thing had been removed with surgical precision that left no trace of the removal process itself. The pattern suggested a force that could process entire star systems in a matter of days, operating with technology that transcended known scientific limitations. Panic began spreading through Council space as species realized they were facing something beyond their ability to comprehend or combat. The crystalline collective, whose consciousness existed partially outside normal space-time, reported sensing a hunger that consumes meaning itself. The psionic brotherhood detected mental resonances that described intelligence so vast that individual minds couldn't process it without suffering permanent damage. ZYX then found himself thinking about Captain Chen's warning as he watched the council dissolve into barely controlled hysteria. Whatever was removing life from star systems operated on a scale that made the Ravagers look like territorial animals fighting over scraps. This was something that viewed biological existence itself as either a resource to be harvested or a contamination to be cleaned. The fourth emergency session in 2 weeks had just concluded with no progress beyond increasingly desperate evacuation plans when ZYX then received a familiar communication. Captain Chen's voice carried the same gentle warmth, but something underneath it suggested that humanity was no longer playing by the rules that had governed their previous shadow operations. Ambassador, I believe it's time for another conversation. Same coordinates as before. And ZYX then? This time, bring whoever else you think should know what's coming. The choice of who to bring proved surprisingly simple. ZYX then selected Director Vothran for his military expertise, Dr. YXTI for her scientific perspective, and Ambassador Keth for her strategic intelligence capabilities. 3 of the Council's most experienced leaders, representing the military, scientific, and intelligence aspects of their civilization. When they arrived at the asteroid field, the human fleet had grown. Hundreds of ships now filled the space where dozens had been before, and the vessels themselves had changed. These weren't the sleek predators he'd seen during the Ravager conflict. These were something else entirely. Massive constructs that seemed to bend space around themselves, their hulls incorporating technologies that ZYX then couldn't begin to identify. Captain Chun met them in a conference room aboard a ship so large that it qualified as a mobile space station. The walls displayed real-time tactical information spanning half the galaxy, showing force deployments and energy signatures that painted a picture of preparation for something beyond conventional warfare. Thank you all for coming, she began, her diplomatic training evident in how she addressed each delegate according to their species' preferred protocols. I'm afraid the situation is more serious than your intelligence reports indicate. Director Vothran, whose people had fought in every major galactic conflict, leaned forward with the intensity that marked seasoned warriors facing an unknown threat. How much more serious? Our projections suggest complete biological sterilization of Council space within 18 months if the current rate of system losses continues. Your projections are optimistic, Captain Chen replied, calling up a holographic display that showed the galaxy with vast sections marked in ominous red. The entities responsible for the sterilizations aren't advancing randomly. They're following specific resource gradients, targeting systems with the highest concentrations of complex biological matter. Core Council worlds will be hit within 6 months, not 18. Dr. YXTI's scientific curiosity overrode her fear. Entities? You made contact with whatever is responsible. We've identified them, Captain Chen corrected. Contact would be impossible. What you're facing is a type of cosmic gardener, entities that exist primarily in higher dimensional space, but can manipulate matter in our reality. They view biological evolution as an uncontrolled contamination that interferes with the universe's natural order. The silence that followed was broken by Ambassador Ketha's translated harmonics, expressing the Hive Collective's deepest form of horror. They want to sterilize the entire galaxy? Not sterilize, Captain Chen said quietly. Purify. From their perspective, biological life is a chaotic element that that prevents the universe from achieving its intended state of perfect mathematical harmony. They're not malicious, they're performing maintenance. ZYX then felt his protective coloring shift to patterns associated with existential dread. How do you fight something like that? You don't, Captain Chen answered. At least, not the way the Council fights. These entities exist partially outside our reality. They can manipulate matter and energy in ways that make our most advanced weapons irrelevant. Traditional military responses are worse than useless. They're counterproductive. Then what do you propose? Director Vothran demanded, his warrior's instincts frustrated by an enemy that couldn't be fought in any conventional sense. Captain Chen's smile carried implications that made every delegate in the room simultaneously hopeful and terrified. Humanity has advantages that other species lack. We've spent our entire evolutionary history developing psychological adaptations for impossible situations. We excel at finding solutions that require abandoning sanity in favor of necessity. The main display changed to show something that defied description. Vast structures being constructed in the void between galaxies, their geometry following patterns that seemed to exist in more dimensions than visual perception could process. The scale was incomprehensible, making galactic superclusters look like individual atoms in a larger pattern. For the past 8 months, Earth's combined scientific and military resources have been working on something called the Reality Anchor Project, Captain Chen explained. We're building weapons that don't fight in our dimension. They fight in the spaces between dimensions, targeting the entity's ability to manifest in our reality. Dr. Yexti studied the displays with growing amazement and horror. The energy requirements alone should be impossible. You need to harness the power output of entire star systems. We're using 37 star systems, Captain Shan confirmed casually. All uninhabited, all carefully selected to avoid affecting existing life. We've built Dyson spheres around each star and converted their entire energy output into the construction process. The casual mention of constructing 37 Dyson spheres made Ambassador Ketha's harmonics shift to frequencies associated with complete cognitive overload. That's centuries of work for any known civilization. It's 18 months of work when you have 10 billion humans who understand that the alternative is universal extinction, Captain Chen replied. We're very good at motivation through existential stakes. 10 billion, ZYX then whispered. But Earth's population was only 8 billion when you joined the Council. Captain Chen's expression grew complicated, mixing pride with something that might have been regret. We've made some modifications to human physiology that allow for accelerated reproduction and development when necessary. Current Earth population is 47 billion and growing exponentially. We're also producing humans specifically designed for operations in hostile environments, including the spaces between dimensions. The implications hit the assembled delegates like physical blows. Humanity hadn't just been building weapons. They had been rebuilding themselves into something capable of fighting entities that existed beyond normal reality. They were transforming their entire species into tools for combating impossible threats. The reality anchors will be operational in 3 weeks, Captain Chen continued. When they activate, the entity's ability to manipulate our dimension will be severely limited. But the process will cause significant disruptions to local spacetime. We recommend that all Council species evacuate to designated safe zones until the operation is complete. Director Vothran's military training made him focus on practical details. What kind of disruptions? Reality will become temporarily unstable in combat zones. Physical laws may fluctuate, time may flow irregularly, and some regions of space might experience dimensional bleeding. Nothing that will cause permanent damage, but definitely hazardous to biological life, not specifically adapted for dimensional warfare. The meeting continued for hours as Captain Chen outlined humanity's plan to fight a war that couldn't be fought using weapons that shouldn't exist against enemies that lived outside reality itself. By the end, ZYX then understood that he had been witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. An entire species voluntarily transforming itself into something beyond recognition in order to protect civilizations that would never fully understand the sacrifice being made. As they prepared to leave, Captain Shun pulled ZYX then aside for a private word. gentle smile remained, but her eyes held depths that seemed to contain entire universes. When this is over, humanity will still want to be friends with the council species, she said quietly. But we'll be different, change in ways that might be difficult to accept. I hope you'll remember that everything we're becoming is in service of preserving what you already are. ZYX then nodded, though part of him wondered if humanity would still be recognizably human when their transformation was complete. They were voluntarily abandoning their biological limitations to become something capable of fighting cosmic forces, and that kind of change might be irreversible. Will you win? He asked. Captain Chen's smile brightened with absolutely terrifying confidence. Ambassador, we're humans. We excel at impossible situations. The entities think they're purifying the universe of biological contamination. They're about to learn what happens when the contamination fights back. As a ship departed, ZYX then looked back at the human fleet and realized that he was watching the birth of something entirely new, a species that had chosen to become mythological in order to protect the mundane, legendary in order to preserve the ordinary. Humanity was ascending to cosmic significance not to rule the galaxy, but to garden it with tools that gods might envy. The universe was about to discover what happened when an unstoppable force met an immovable object, and both sides were convinced they were fighting for the future of existence itself. The war began on a Tuesday, Galactic Standard Time, at precisely 14:27 hours. ZYX then was aboard the Council Evacuation Fleet, safely positioned at the edge of the designated combat zone, when reality itself went to war. The first sign wasn't visual or auditory. It was a fundamental shift in the nature of existence that every conscious being in the galaxy felt simultaneously. Space-time began fluctuating like water disturbed by unseen forces, and the basic constants of physics started varying in ways that made scientific instruments scream warnings about impossible readings. Through the observation deck's reinforced windows, ZYX then watched as humanity's reality anchors activated. The massive constructs that had been built in the void between galaxies suddenly blazed to life, their exotic energies reaching across dimensional barriers to grasp entities that had never before been challenged in their cosmic maintenance duties. What followed could barely be described in language evolved for three-dimensional reality. The space between stars became a battlefield where the laws of nature served as weapons, where causality itself was ammunition in a conflict fought across multiple layers of existence simultaneously. Human ships that had looked impossibly advanced now revealed their true nature as mobile fortifications designed for combat in spaces that didn't technically exist. The entity's response was immediate and terrifying. Regions of space simply ceased following known physics, as beings with near-godlike power tried to reassert their control over reality's fundamental structure. Stars flickered between different states of matter, planets experienced time in reverse, and entire star systems became probability clouds where multiple versions of events occurred simultaneously. But humanity had prepared for impossible conditions. Their modified warriors fought in environmental suits that existed partially outside normal space-time, wielding weapons that fired concepts rather than energy, and bullets that were aimed at targets' existence rather than their physical forms. They moved through battlefields where up and down were relative terms, and where past and future could become tactical positions. By the ancient protocols, whispered Dr. YXTI, watching through sensors that were adapting to impossible physics in real time. They're actually winning. The entities that had seemed unstoppable when sterilizing defenseless star systems found themselves facing something they had never encountered in their cosmic existence. Biological life that refused to be purified, that adapted to impossible conditions, and transformed those conditions into advantages. Humanity fought like a virus that had learned to infect reality itself, spreading through dimensional spaces and establishing footholds where none should have been possible. The battle raged for 72 hours by some measurements, 3 days by others, and 17 years according to time streams that experienced the conflict from beginning to end in recursive loops. When the fluctuations finally stabilized, the immediate aftermath was silence. Not just the absence of sound, but the absence of the cosmic background noise that entities had been generating for millions of years. Captain Chen's transmission came through clear and strong, her voice carrying the same gentle warmth despite having just fought a war against the universe's maintenance crew. All Council vessels, this is humanity. The immediate threat has been neutralized. You're cleared to return to normal space operations. The evacuation fleet's return journey took them through regions where reality was still settling back into stable patterns. ZYX then saw human ships conducting what they called dimensional cleanup, teams of impossibly modified humans working to smooth out wrinkles in space-time and restore normal physics to areas that had experienced combat conditions. But the most striking sight was the evidence of humanity's transformation. The beings working in the impossible environment between dimensions were recognizably human in their basic structure, but they had become something more. They moved with the confidence of creatures who had learned to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, who could perceive time as a navigable dimension and manipulate probability as easily as physical matter. When ZYX then finally reunited with Captain Chen aboard the command vessel, he almost didn't recognize her. She retained her gentle demeanor and warm smile, but something fundamental had changed. Her presence now suggested depths that extended far beyond three-dimensional space, and her eyes held knowledge that encompassed aspects of existence he couldn't even imagine. The entities weren't destroyed, she explained, settling into her command chair with movements that seemed to phase slightly between multiple positions. That would have been counterproductive. They serve important functions in maintaining cosmic stability. We simply negotiated new terms for their operations. Negotiated? Ambassador Keth's harmonics carried astonishment that bordered on disbelief. With beings that view biological life as contamination, Captain Chen's smile carried implications that made reality seem more flexible around her. It turns out that when contamination becomes complex enough to fight back effectively, the maintenance protocols have to be updated. The entities now classify advanced biological civilizations as beneficial complexity rather than chaotic contamination. Dr. Yexti leaned forward with scientific fascination overriding her fear. How did you convince beings with near-godlike power to change their fundamental programming? By demonstrating that biological life had evolved to the point where it could contribute to universal order rather than disrupting it, Captain Chen explained. We showed them the Council's achievements, how diverse species work together to solve problems, how cooperation creates stability across vast regions of space, how biological intelligence can enhance rather than threaten cosmic harmony. And if they hadn't agreed to the new classification, Captain Chen's expression grew thoughtful, and for a moment, ZYX then glimpsed the depths of transformation that humanity had undergone. Then, we would have continued fighting until we won, or until there was nothing left to protect. Humans are remarkably stubborn about protecting the things we care about. The casual mention of being willing to fight cosmic forces to extinction sent chills through every delegate present. They were seeing the ultimate expression of humanity's dual nature. Beings capable of infinite gentleness who could become absolutely implacable when defending those they had chosen to love. Over the following weeks, as normal space operations resumed and the Council began processing what had happened, the true scope of humanity's transformation became apparent. Earth population had stabilized at 47 billion, but these weren't the same humans who had first approached the Council years earlier. They had voluntarily evolved beyond their original biological limitations, becoming something that could exist comfortably in multiple dimensions while retaining their essential humanity. The modifications weren't just physical. Human psychology had been enhanced to process impossible information without suffering mental breakdown. Their emotional structures had been reinforced to maintain sanity during reality-bending combat, and their social coordination had been upgraded to function as a collective intelligence when necessary while preserving individual personality and choice. Yet despite these cosmic-level changes, they remained recognizably human in the ways that mattered most. They still formed deep friendships with alien species, still valued cooperation over domination, still preferred peaceful solutions whenever possible, and still showed genuine concern for the welfare of beings completely unlike themselves. We're still the same people you met at Council Station, Captain Chen assured ZYX then during one of their private conversations. We just have better tools now for protecting the things we believe in. And what do you believe in? ZYX then asked. Her answer came without hesitation. The right of every sapient species to develop according to their own nature without being destroyed by forces beyond their control. The value of diversity in creating solutions to impossible problems. The beauty of cooperation between beings who could easily be enemies instead. The future we can build together if we're willing to protect it from those who would unmake it. As the months passed, humanity settled into their new role as the galaxy's guardian angels. They continued their diplomatic relationships with the Council, maintained their trade agreements, and shared their knowledge freely. But now they did so from a position of being cosmic-level entities who could fight wars in dimensions that most species couldn't even perceive. The Ravager threat had been completely eliminated, not just the active fleets, but the entire culture of predation that had spawned them. Human intervention teams had systematically dismantled every aggressive civilization that threatened peaceful species, offering rehabilitation to those who would accept it and extinction to those who wouldn't. Refugee populations that had lived in fear for generations now thrived under human protection. Trade routes that had been too dangerous for centuries were reopened, with human patrols maintaining security. Scientific research flourished as species could explore dangerous phenomena, knowing that humanity would intervene if they encountered threats beyond their capabilities. But perhaps the most remarkable change was in the galaxy's overall psychology. Species that had spent millennia looking over their shoulders for existential threats could finally focus on growth, exploration, and cooperation. The universe had become a fundamentally safer place because one species had been willing to become whatever was necessary to protect their friends. ZYX then often reflected on the journey from his first meeting with the peaceful human delegation to watching them become cosmic gardeners who cultivated civilizations and pruned threats with equal skill. He had learned that true peace wasn't the absence of violence. It was having someone capable of violence choosing to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. The humans had kept their promise to remain friends with the Council species. They were different now, transformed by their willing ascension to cosmic significance, but the essential warmth and cooperation that had characterized their first contact remained unchanged. They had simply become powerful enough to ensure that their friendships could last forever. In his final report to the Council archives, ZYX then wrote, "Humanity has taught us that evolution's ultimate achievement isn't the abandonment of violence, but the wisdom to use it only in service of peace. They have become the universe's immune system, protecting the garden of civilization from diseases that would destroy it. We are safer than we have ever been, not because the universe has become less dangerous, but because we have allies who are more dangerous than anything that might threaten us." The report concluded with a personal observation that would become legendary among Council historians. "I thought I knew humans when they arrived as peaceful diplomats seeking friendship. I learned what they truly were when their fury shattered everything that threatened the future they had chosen to protect. They are gardeners with flaming swords, and we are fortunate beyond measure that they have chosen to tend the garden we all share." The galaxy had found its guardians, and the guardians had found their purpose. Peace, it turned out, was not a natural state of the universe. It was an artifact created and maintained by those willing to become terrible enough to protect it. Humanity had volunteered for that terrible responsibility, and in doing so, they had made the impossible possible, a cosmos where gentleness could flourish because someone else was willing to be strong.